Principal Matters Podcast, episode 350. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the school leaders podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're talking about T.E.A.M. Together, everyone achieves more, with my special guests, Bryan Miltenberg and Gary Karlson. Bryan Miltenberg is the proud principal of Aquebogue Elementary School in Riverhead, New York. He's been a teacher, dean, and middle school assistant principal, and has presented and published on topics including school climate and culture, instructional technology, self-aware leadership, inclusivity, time management, and co-teaching partnerships. Against all logic, he remains a suffering, lifelong Mets and Jets fan. And also in the room with me is Gary Karlson, an elementary administrator after nearly 20 years as a teacher, and he usually follows that info with a dad joke that he was a good teacher for at least a few of them. He lives on Eastern Long Island with his ultra-supportive wife and two sons. As assistant principal of Aquebogue Elementary School, he and Bryan lead an amazing staff dedicated to serving grades K through 4 with the motto of T.E.A.M. Together, everyone achieves more. Bryan and Gary, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners something they may be surprised to know about you? And Bryan, you go first.
Awesome. Well, Will, thanks so much for having us on. We really appreciate it. I think one gap that I have to fill in, because Gary mentioned it, is that I also live with my wife and ultra supportive family. So I want to get that out there right away to some very special people who might be listening. But yeah, for me, I've been really lucky in my career as an educator to have amazing mentors along the way, including right now and at every step. So, my journey started as a teacher in New York City public schools, and been going a little bit further east every time that I move. So next time I think I'm going to be in the ocean if I move again. But something you might not know about me or be surprised to know about me. Well, I never wanted to become a teacher, actually. We interview people who say they always knew they wanted to be teachers. I always knew that I probably didn't, because I came from a family of teachers. My first goal in life was to be a musician, actually. So I lived that life for a little while, going on the road, living in a van, traveling and seeing stuff, and didn't quite work out, but certainly learned a lot from that I carry with me now, and made my way into education and fell in love with it and never looked back.
So Bryan, what instrument or instruments did you play?
Let's see. I was a guitar player, a drummer, and a singer, believe it or not.
Man, all right. Next time we're together, it's the Bryan Miltenberg show. So Gary and I are going to call you out. Gary, what's something listeners might be surprised to know about you?
Well, I just learned a little something about Bryan, about his vocal abilities. I have seen some of the instrumentation come out in an opportunity or two, but I did not know that he's got the vocal pipes to go. Well, I'm not an interesting person, so that's probably something you should know about me. So any interesting nuggets that you farm out today during the podcast, that's all on you and your skills as a podcaster. But I will say that I sort of secretly credit a 15-year bartending string for a lot of my success in the administrator role, just like I did in the teacher role. I just feel like the cue that I learned to build, when I was younger, in my early 20s, it was a very shallow one. So there was the thing that was right in front of my nose, and if I wasn't addressing it, then I was probably forgetting it or displacing it. And my cue just sort of really just deepened and working in that environment where things were always coming to the forefront, and you were constantly I drew a lot of parallels between that and the classroom, where there were a lot of variables and a lot of needs, and you were constantly judging which ones needed attention first and were the most pressing. And that's kind of carried over into the assistant principal role too, where it's if it's quiet, it means you're missing something.
Well, there are some amazing books right behind you, Gary. For those Principal Matters listeners that are listening, they don't get to see that. Obviously, you love children's books. So I would be curious later to find out which of those is your favorite. But I'll say this about bartending. Jen Schwanke, who co-hosts this podcast regularly, was also a bartender. And so there must be something about that personality that makes it where you can manage all personality types probably with a smile. So Gary, that's how I think your smile is so disarming. Let me set the context for listeners. Bryan, you are a listener to this podcast, and you reached out to me a long time ago now because we've set up this conversation months ago. And you and Gary have such a unique story that when we were sharing back and forth about those transition stories, I said, I want to invite you guys into the Principal Matters audience to talk about several things. One, the school that you lead. Two, the unique way that you two ended up in leadership together. And three, the lessons you guys have learned in that leadership together. So I want you to just take a minute, first of all, to talk about Aquebogue, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, your beautiful elementary school there in Riverhead, New York. What are some of the outcomes from your school that you guys are most proud of? And then can you talk a little bit about this motto, T.E.A.M, Together Everyone Achieves More, and how this has influenced the way you guys service your students and teachers?
You want to start by talking about the school, Gary, and I'll kind of pick up on the team thing?
Sure, absolutely, Bryan. So our school is probably a microcosm of schools that a lot of your listeners are from. So if your listeners are from kind of rural settings, there's that element is here. If your listeners are from kind of a higher density population, we've got elements of that out here in Riverhead too. And it's really a building that encompasses an evolving demographic that has just really been really worthy of celebrating and elevating. So we're just making sure we're always trying to elevate and celebrate everyone who was here a generation ago, and also, is currently walking through our doors. And our staff is ready for that work, and they're just really appreciative. They're really engaged in those conversations with us. Some stuff that Bryan, I'm sure, can talk a lot about the things that we're proud of here. Something that I just wanted to highlight because it's small. It's easy to highlight like the big things, but I'm going to highlight this only because we have candidates highlight this for us through the years, is something called like our SIB Shops program. So one of my sons is neurotypical, and I have another son that has multiple significant disabilities. And because of that, we stumbled upon a program outside of school called SIB Shops, which is a support group for siblings of students with special needs. And
I'm going to pause for just a moment because I think Gary's mic may have just gone out. Gary, I'm going to ask you to repeat that. You were just talking about that program. Tell us the name of it again, and then how you guys got involved.
Sure. So the name of the program was SIB Shops, and it is a national program that can run in different groups or offices and whatnot, but we hadn't seen it in schools. And so when Bryan and I first came here, we wanted to take a look at bringing that here, understanding that it would not serve a tremendous percentage of the student population. And so what we were able to do is find a facilitator who ran it outside of schools that my son attended about a half an hour away from here, bring her in and talk about the most essential elements of it. And we were very fortunate to have a school psychologist who was looking to do exactly that type of work. And so working with the outside person and our psychologist, we were able to establish that back in 2019. And now we're watching it. When I say grow, I more just mean deepen here culturally. And the thing I want to highlight about it, Will, is it only serves about 7 kids, right? So our school is just under 500 students. And I don't think there's too many programs, like by design, you investigate that serve that small of a student, right? I'm not a math guy, but calling it 1 or 2% of your student population, that's generally not how we frame big initiatives around a school. But I just think that it sends the message to our staff and our community that, like, if our school is going to go this hard after the individual needs and circumstances of these large handful of kids, that of course we're going to do that in a classroom with 23 kids. Of course we're going to individualize for families and students, because it's what we do as a place. And so anyone who's in this place is doing that for the people that they interact with.
Oh, I love that. How do you spell that? Is it zip or sip?
Oh, I apologize. SIB, like a sibling, so SIB.
Oh, SIB,
Yep,
SIB.
SHOPS,
Okay,
and yeah.
love it. Bryan, how about you? What are some things that you would highlight as outcomes and things you guys are proud of serving your students?
Well, I think, Gary, I think what the work with SIB shops kind of speaks to is the larger picture. One of our operating principles that we think about all the time is how do we make school feel like home for all of our kids, especially when we are in the midst of a really rapidly changing community. And we have an incredibly vibrant community out here on the East End. But if you look back, 15 years ago in this community, we may have had a handful of English language learners. Now we're up to almost like about 50% of our students are English language learners. So we've seen a great deal of change in our community. And when our community changes and when we're seeing this new richness enter our community, what we're often thinking about is, what do we have to do to change to support everyone in our community? So that starts for us with, how do we greet people at the door? When we started, we had an amazing security team who was our first faces that would be greeting our parents. But what we quickly realized is that no matter how great they are, because the majority of our parents don't speak English as their first language, they weren't able to get their basic needs met on their first experience of being in our school is one of not being able to get what they need, right? So we were able to advocate and hire for a bilingual greeter who has really just, as the first face for our school, can help not just our Spanish speaking, but also our English speaking families. So moves like that bring a sense of inclusivity that benefit everyone. And so, what we are really looking to do is just grow that voice and that leadership for students, staff, and families, and just, honor and celebrate the language and the culture that we have here in our community, help our community see these things as assets and strengths, which they are, and really just design for inclusivity from the start.
Wow. Well, let me pause for a moment and tell Principal Matters listeners a little context and history, because even though most of my life I spent growing up in West Tennessee in the farm near my grandparents, my dad was also in the military. So when I was young, he was then, and then he got out, and we were raised back in West Tennessee. But when I was in high school, he re-enlisted in the Navy, and we lived in New York for a short time before his ship was sent to Virginia Beach. So I went to school at East Meadow High School on Long Island. And so and I've looked where you guys are, and you're not very far away. I mean, you guys are in a really beautiful part, really close to the ocean there on Long Island. But the demographics of Long Island have changed a lot, and you guys are serving a lot of second language speakers. And for Principal Matters listeners, the episode that we're recording right now is going to come out probably sometime in June, because I have so many episodes that are recorded in bank. But one of the previous guests on this show will have been Karlson Thomas, who's a consultant in English language services to schools. And we had a long conversation there about ways that school leaders can be better engaging those students. So I want to park here for just a moment, because with a school who's seen that kind of shift with a student population, I'm just curious, what other ways have you guys learned to engage those students in helping them with language acquisition, and also in building a community that's cohesive and unified with so much diversity?
Well, where I would go is there's kind of some things are more concrete and built into like curriculum and systems, and some things are more abstract. So, in the sense of our school culture, one of the things we talk about a lot is language status and power. You know, what we are trying to do is transition from a school in which students might have been reluctant, if not embarrassed, to show that they speak another language, to a school where students are proud to show that they bring this other language to the table. So we always use the words beautiful, powerful, and valuable when we talk about the Spanish language. And when I say Spanish, it's just because that's our community. It could be whatever, you know, is in your community. But, you know, how have we done that? You know, one of the most powerful things that we've been able to do is to start a dual language program here that's now in its second year and growing. And we've had amazing support and an incredible team. And I think what that's kind of really been able to show is just how incredibly smart and talented our English language learners are. And you see that when they get the opportunity to learn content in their native language while learning English. And it's amazing when some of our staff can come in and see our kids in a new way, when they see them come in and they're crushing it in math or in science, in Spanish. And it's like, oh, wow, like these kids are really smart. And it's like, we always knew they were smart, but it was hard to get to see it, right? Because you're learning a language while you're learning the content. So, you know, that's been a great gift that we've been able to give to our kids with the help of a lot of really talented staff members. And then I think it's just in a lot of the different messaging and signaling that we send out and that the staff and the community picks up on in terms of how do we integrate that language? How do we integrate it into the morning announcements? How do we integrate it into our signage, into the books that are in our libraries, into the communication that we put out to families? And specifically, you know, we do family surveys every year in Spanish and English, and we have an extra question that goes onto our Spanish survey about just how we can better support Spanish-speaking families, you know, and we look really hard at that because one of the things we always say is, you know, we're two white, middle-class, monolingual guys, right? So we can't speak for everyone in our community. We have to speak with them. We have to listen to them. And we get, luckily, amazing feedback from them and from our staff and our kids about how we can best move forward to support everyone.
Hi, friends. I want to take a quick break here to ask you a question. Did you know that leaders learn better together? When we isolate ourselves from the input and insight of others, then we work within the limitations of our own ideas and experience. And that's why I'm so grateful that you're listening to this podcast right now. It's also why I want to keep you informed of upcoming episodes, as well as leadership academies, mastermind offerings, or executive coaching opportunities I'm making available to leaders like you. Go to williamdparker.com and check out the services link to learn more, or visit my website and select the subscribe button to be on the weekly Principal Matters mailing list. Thank you so much for learning together. Now let's jump back into the rest of today's episode. Thanks for that feedback, Bryan. Gary, I'm going to ask you to tell a story about how the two of you ended up in leadership together, because part of the conversation that I want to have today too is about the lessons you guys have learned in leadership. But that leadership story didn't just start when you guys took on these new titles. So why don't you take us down that road a little bit and tell us, and feel free to add any additional thoughts you wanted to what Bryan has said, but can you tell us that story?
Sure, I'm happy to tell you the story about how Bryan and I met. I'm gonna go back a month or two before that, you know, and just how I wound up in the seat next to Bryan, and that teaching in Riverhead for 18 years and really being ready to become an administrator and wanting to stay close to home. I've been in this district the whole time, and it's just a special place for me. And so there's just not a lot of administrative openings. So you don't always get to pick and choose what's open. And so a principalship became available here, and having no administrative experience, I knew that I was a stretch candidate. And some people on the interview team even told me that I kind of, maybe started out as like a courtesy, but I wanted to do it to kind of declare that I was ready for that. I also was mentioning before the recording started that I was a union official in the same district for 6 years, and was very involved for even longer than that. And so it was kind of like a demarcation point for me that I wanted to be forthright with the people I was supporting in that role, that I was ready to try to do something else. So over we go to the interview site, which was not this school. They were holding it off site a little bit, and it was at another elementary school. And I'm saying hi to a bunch of staff members over there, because I had worked in that building for some years, and they were running behind, which apparently is like how all interviews go, running behind. And so in came the person who was interviewing after me, and this guy sits down, and we just started chatting about family, chatting about our background a little bit. And this person was very happy to like figure out why so many people were saying hi to me, because he found it kind of strange that when I told him, no, I worked here for about a decade, he said, okay, well, that makes a bunch of sense. And, then I got called in and got tunnel vision, and, away we go, and did my best in that interview. And so, after the district concluded its process, and I heard the name, so that name sounds familiar to me, and I saw a picture from a board meeting, and I said, that guy, I know that guy. That's the that's the guy I sat next to. And at another principalship interview, that I ran into someone I knew before the interview, and that person wound up getting the job. So I'm like the reverse kiss of death for principalship interviews. So if you're an aspiring principal and you're really looking to get in somewhere, you want to make sure you're scheduled right after me, because I think I go in, I lower that bar real low for that interview committee, and in comes the subsequent candidate, and it's very good news. So that's my recollection of the story. A lot's happened over 4 years, but that's the Miltenberg Karlson origin story from my seat.
So Bryan, fill in the gaps. What would you add to that story?
Well, the funny thing is Will, I'm sitting there, and Gary is clearly like a returning. It felt like he was a returning conquering hero in this setting. And the first thing I'm thinking to myself is like, well, there's no way I'm going to get this. Once he tells me his story, I was like, there's no way I'm going to get this job. This guy is like, he just seemed like a rock star. So I don't know. Someone made a mistake somewhere. And I did end up moving forward. But the first thing, I can tell you the first thing I thought, because the assistant principal of this school at the time actually very quickly left to take a principalship elsewhere. So one of my first job was actually to hire an assistant principal. So my mind immediately went, I was like, So I called up one of the other principals. I was like, tell me about this guy who I was sitting next to, because he really seemed like really smart. He seemed really plugged in to what was going on in the community. And it kind of went from there.
Oh, I love that story. And it's so unique. Here you guys are sitting right by each other, interviewing for the same position. And Gary, it's also, there's a lot of emotion involved when you're interviewing for a position in a place where you work. And then Bryan gets that title, but then is able to circle back to you and then pull you into this leadership in a school for which you were very familiar, and Bryan stepping in as a new leader, if I'm interpreting that correctly. The principal AP relationship to me is one of the most unique, and not all schools have the privilege of having a principal AP. Some schools do. Some schools have teams of administrators depending on the size of the school, but I've been both an assistant principal and principal. And so I wanted to just ask you guys about that relationship. How have the two of you personally and professionally benefited from your shared leadership experience, from being a team together?
Well, I had an amazing principal when I was an assistant principal, who really taught me so much. I mean, obviously about being an assistant principal, but then later about how to work with an assistant principal as a principal. So that's Tim Martin from Islip, just an incredible guy. And one of the things he always told me was hire your opposites. And so I guess that was his way of saying that he and I were opposite, which we very much were, but it totally worked. Now, I don't know if Gary and I are total opposites, but I think one of the reasons Gary has become such a mentor to me despite where we are, on the org chart, I do consider him a mentor, is just because he comes with such a different experience than I do. Just in a lot of different ways. I think our teaching experiences were very different, not only in the settings we taught, the grade levels we taught, but just our general approach. So when you can bring two different sides, right, and not that it's always a dichotomy, together, like I learned so much from him. I'd like to think he learns from me, and we can bring those two different perspectives, rather than hiring someone who just matches what you think, says all the things you think in an interview, says exactly what you want to hear, and then you end up with two people who think exactly the same and can't pivot, can't be flexible. Whereas we're always, I think, pushing each other, challenging each other. I think one of the most common things you'll hear, like in our office, is like, I'm going to push back on that, and we push back on each other all the time. And I think that's one of the reasons we arrive at a lot of good outcomes in the end, and why it takes a long time for us seemingly sometimes to make decisions, because we go through such a process together, bringing our different perspectives to bear.
Wow. And that's such a benefit. Gary, what would you add to that?
So I would add that, I've never been in the position of being, a principal and then developing an assistant principal, but a few things that stand out to me are like, what could make it go sideways would be a couple of things. One, if the principal didn't trust the aspirations of the assistant principal, or so when Bryan asked me, would you like to be a principal someday? I don't know how I would have answered that had I not met him as an aspiring principal. So there was just like, and he had shared with me that was a contributing factor to my selection as the best candidate. Is he was looking for somebody who wanted to do all the things, learn all the things, make all the considerations, do their best to take on that full leadership perspective. So we never had to have any layers about that. And also just really, Bryan does, I wouldn't say there's any demands placed on me, but the expectation is like the only time it's uncomfortable is when we both agree right away on something, where then we'll have to sit and just deliberately try to manufacture other viewpoints. And a lot of times it does happen naturally. And so not only is that welcomed, I view that as kind of my chief job. And Bryan will say to me when we kind of meet and make some time to reflect together, he'll tell me, Gary, like you're my number one job, because when I can make you the lever to all these other things, your development and your growth is my primary responsibility. And I told Bryan off the record the other day that is just such a way. You can't set higher expectations for your assistant principal than to say you're going to develop into a beyond competent principal, and in the meantime, like I'm making that my chief responsibility. And I've just thought that left the onus on me, but also set the expectation really high, so that, we don't hide from each other. We don't hide issues from each other. We don't hide perspectives from one another. And if we did, it would be to the detriment of the school. So it's just not how we function.
It's obvious you guys trust each other a lot. And for me, that's the most important element of that AP principal relationship, because I remember, well, let me just be blunt. You guys not only engage in the daily routines and processes necessary for school, for school and for children to learn, but you also battle together. There's situations that come to you where you need unity. You need to make sure that you're on the same page. You're going to move forward with people trying to pull you different directions and trying to put you on. Sometimes it's almost like you're the parents of a school in a sense, and kids and teachers and community members might try well, mom didn't give me the answer I want, so I'll go to dad, or dad didn't give me the answer, so I want to go to mom. So how do you guys maintain that kind of trust with each other where you can disagree about things, but then you show a unified front?
I'll jump in first, Bryan, and I'll say that that was a concern, right? So being familiar to so many people in this community, which I was, Bryan was unfamiliar. and exciting. I was familiar and probably a little bit boring to people, but people I did have deep relationships with some of the staff members here, some of the community members here. So I was very cognizant that that was going to be something that I had to be wary of, and really, still value the background history you have with people without even allowing the appearance that they were leveraging those things into special treatment. We hope everyone gets a high degree of treatment, but that's different than special treatment. So just being aware and kind of mindful of that was very important. And then I'll also say that, I mean, if we were keeping a tally over 4 years, maybe there'd be an outlier. I don't know, but it's not, I wouldn't classify it as a unified front. I would really just classify it as actual authentic unification. We will go through things as long as we need to. And when we arrive at that point, I've never felt like I've had to compromise a belief or compromise a value in order to support the communication that Bryan was going to put forward. We got there through like really engaged discussion between the two of us, and frequently with people beyond just the two of us.
Love it.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of times for us, so many times throughout our time together, Gary's a very creative person. He's a super ideas guy. And the ideas he comes up with are incredible. And I think for me, when you coming in unknown to the community, there you want to be cautious, right? You want to be careful, but so many times I think my response has been, let's try it. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. And I think when you can empower rather than control or manage the other leaders in your building, I think that's when you start to see like exponential growth, because that kind of mentality, I think it becomes something that gets pushed out to the community, right? So if it's me saying that to Gary, hey, let's try it, let's see how it goes when we have a new idea, that same thing goes down to the teachers, and from the teachers to the other staff, and to the students as well, where you can kind of foster a culture of experimentation without fear. And I think that's been a big part for us.
Well, as we wrap up this conversation, I want to take us into some of the lessons that both of you have learned from transitioning from teaching into school leadership, because a lot of the listeners that listen to the show are experienced leaders, but also aspiring leaders or leaders that maybe even considering a different role. And so I'm just curious from the both of you, as you look back, if you were to sit down and have coffee with a friend who's like, I'm thinking about becoming a leader, or I'm thinking about moving roles, what are some things that you might share with them that were helpful for you when you were looking at those transitions? Because everyone's journey is different, but what are some things that you would say to them that they may want to keep in mind?
I think when you go into a new organization, you have to really be cognizant of just how different each organization is, and you have to become a super student of your school, because schools seem the same on the surface, right? We do the same things. We have classes, we have teachers, we have lunch. They're so incredibly different, though, in the actual inner workings of the school. And so when you come in, I think you have to dedicate yourself 200% to learning what is your school. And it's not done in 90 days. We talk about 90-day plans, but that's a multi-year project. I mean, I think we're still uncovering layers of things we didn't quite understand in our school after 4 years. But really trying to accelerate that. Gary and I joke about the document I created when I overlapped with the previous principal for a couple weeks, just based on contracts and stuff. And I think I really drove him crazy just trying to get as much info out of him before he left. So the first document I shared with Gary was like 50 or 60 pages on just the notes I had taken about what were the structures. And that doesn't even scratch the surface. It truly does not scratch the surface. So I think being a student of your school first before you bring anything in, and avoiding, one of the things we talk about a lot, which I kind of refer to as like skin graft leadership or organ transplant leadership, where people try to take They come into a new role and they say, all right, great. I did these 3 things in my former district. I'm going to take those 3 things. I'm going to drop them here and we're going to go. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. Like we often see a lot of people transitioning who bring solutions in search of problems rather than taking the time, understand, is that a problem that even exists here before you bring in a solution that works somewhere else? You know, you have to start organically. And one of the things my former principal said to me, and said it in a blunt way, this probably doesn't maybe sound so professional, but he said, nobody cares what you did elsewhere and they don't want to hear about it. He said, I care. I want to hear about it because maybe it's something that we can use. But when you go out to the teachers, do not say, hey, in my old school, we did this, so that's what I want to do. You can bring those things to the surface as you explore the problems and generate solutions. It could be something, but to start with that is I found is just setting yourself up for failure, because the immediate reaction, I think, from the people in your new organization are going to be, okay, this person does not understand us, did not take the time to understand us, and simply wants to, airdrop something from somewhere else onto here.
Avoid skin grafts and organ transplant leadership. I'm so stealing that, Bryan. Gary, what would you add?
Sure. So I'll add a little bit more to the part of your question about that person who's kind of teetering, right? And do they want to go from one pool to the other? And I was just giving advice to a teacher about something a little different this morning. I said, well, everyone's advice has to be really consumed personally, right? So this might be like really hit home advice for somebody. It might be terrible advice for another listener, right? And you leave it up to them to decide. But you want to do it so that you feel happy and fulfilled too, right? Like don't forget about yourself. And I think the difference between, I feel so happy and fulfilled by this work. And I was trying to think right after you asked the question, this is not something I sit around and think about it, but like if you don't come at it with benevolence and like the assumption of good intentions for every family, every student, every staff member, every community issue that comes your way, don't do it. Because it's difficult work. And if you think that, the kids are the variable, the students are the variable, the families are the variable, I'm not going to say if that's true or not true, but from a mindset standpoint, and this is really something I arrived at after Bryan spearheaded some mindfulness training for about half of our staff this year, like I'm the variable for all of them. And so when I assume that responsibility and I approach it that way, I'm happy. And I'm happy when I'm giving devastating news, or I'm happy when I'm calling with, the kind of phone calls you don't want to have to make, or to families, or the types of conversations with staff that are not going to be what they showed up wanting to have in a day. If you could be forgiving of yourself and others because you're just, that family, even if it's not the approach you take, is being the best parent for their kid that they know how and they believe how, and you give them that respect in every single interaction. Same with the staff and same with a kid, whether they're 5 years old, and figuring it out on the playground, or they're someone who's older and you're teaching them some internet search savvy. Assuming that child is doing the best that they can and that you're there in a coaching / support role, you'll feel fulfilled and happy. And if you view them as all these things that are just happening to you as you're along your journey, I just think I'd be half miserable, and I wouldn't advise it if that's your mindset.
Oh, that's such great advice, Gary. Well, Bryan Miltenberg and Gary Karlson, I'm just so inspired by how real you guys are in your leadership, how the perspectives that you've had, that you have right now leading. But I want Principal Matters listeners to also know how they can connect with you, because there are leaders out there right now that have already heard you say something within your conversation that are like, hey, I want to steal that idea, or I want to try that with my staff, or I want to know how I can better do this with my students. So as we wrap up, I just want to ask each of you to share, how can folks find you and connect with you, and any parting words of advice that you would want to leave with listeners today.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. I'm not necessarily as active as I used to be, but at Bryan Miltenberg, people can definitely connect with me there. If you're local, we always welcome visitors. We love to share what we've got going on. And what I would say to anyone listening is just to always remain in that learning mode. I think that's one of the reasons that we've been able to be successful to the extent that we have here, is by never stopping being a new principal, right? You're always a new principal because communities and dynamics are always changing. Everything is always changing seemingly these days, right? So you're always a student of what's happening and a learner first. And that enables us to think, process, act slowly, move slowly. And when you move and act slowly, it seems like things are going at a slow pace. But when you look back, as we do now over 4 years together, we can see what we accomplished, which is a great deal, by moving so slowly. And we're lucky to have an incredible team here. That's always been a gift to us here.
And Will, for me, my parting advice, Bryan touched on a lot of it about, kind of decision points sometimes being a mirage, and they're maybe not as close as they need to be. But so I'm going to just share something that I've begun sharing with families. It just feels really authentic, and I think is deepening my relationships with them, which is, letting them know that we're here for like the Facebook and the high fives and the fist bumps and all the great celebration that takes place between, the school and the school community, but to also understand that we're just as here for when it goes sideways for their child, because I wouldn't have a job if students didn't have struggles. We teach math and reading and writing and science and social studies, but there's so much other learning that's that's tucked between all that curriculum that administrators support, and that there's nothing to be ashamed of when our phone number pops up, and it's not a robocall, and it's my actual voice, and we have to talk about something that's a real learning opportunity for the student, and it's not a moment of shame or reservation on my end or shame on the family's end to have that conversation. So to lean into that and to normalize that with families. If you want to connect with me, you should reevaluate and connect with smarter, more engaging people. But if you still want to after that, the Twitter handle is Gary K Jr. On Twitter, and we would love to keep the conversation going.
Gary K Jr. Is that Gary K Jr. or JUNIO?
JR.
JR. All right, yeah. Bryan Miltenberg and Gary Karlson. I just want to say as we wrap up, Jimmy Casas likes to say when he's talking to school leaders about the ultimate goal of school leadership is building a community. And I have to agree. And you guys, everything that you've talked about today is just such a great reminder that every day, the responsibilities that we have as leaders ultimately means that we're building a community where people feel safe, where people can trust one another. And Gary, I'm so glad you ended where you did too, which is also a place where you have permission to struggle. This isn't just a place where we celebrate achievement. It's also a place where you can be yourself. And when you need help, guess what? We're here to help you. Well, guys, I just want to say thank you. I've set up this meeting in the middle of a school day where you're already putting out fires. I know from my pre-recording conversation that you guys are already in the middle of doing school business. So thank you so much for the way you serve your communities, for the way you love your kids, for the work that you're doing. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters. And we'll talk to you again soon. You can find free resources like this one at my website at williamdparker.com. Check out the services link on williamdparker.com to learn more about leadership academies, mastermind offerings, and executive coaching. If you're planning professional development for the year ahead, or you're looking for keynote presentations from any of my books, please email me at will@williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together today, and thanks again for doing what matters.